Hey everyone, David here with another review for a new episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and this time it is for the episode entitled Scars. And there's two interesting things about this episode. For one, it's the one that came right after the release of Age of Ultron. So in some way or form, it's going to be tied into the events that happened in Avengers Age of Ultron. And sure enough, it does. In more surprising ways than I thought it would. I thought they were just going to make a couple of references. I thought that they were going to do the same thing in Winter Soldier, or at least initially in Winter Soldier. Or not so much Winter Soldier, because that's when things really did change in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But more so, I guess you could say, with Thor: The Dark World, where events happened over there in London, and we had S.H.I.E.L.D. go over there to investigate, but after that, they kind of disconnected from any kind of ties to Thor: The Dark World, and I felt like maybe, just maybe, they might do that with Avengers Age of Ultron, to where they're just going to have characters looking at a TV screen that says, the Avengers saved the day in that city that the climax took place in that movie. And they kind of do that for a while, but some interesting things get used, either get revealed or get mentioned that tie it to Age of Ultron a little bit better than I thought they would. And the second thing is that this can be considered the penultimate episode. And you guys know how much I love that word. But this could be considered the penultimate episode because even though it's episode 20, which is the third to last episode, technically speaking, the last two episodes will actually be a two-parter of the season finale, part 1 and part 2. They're using up the last two as one, and it's going to be a 2-hour season finale next week. So you can kind of consider this one to be the penultimate episode, being that it's all going to end in next week's episode, which I'm really excited for after witnessing this one, because it looks like what I had been predicting this whole time of having S.H.I.E.L.D. versus the Inhumans, or another scenario could have been Coulson's S.H.I.E.L.D., Gonzales' S.H.I.E.L.D., and then the Inhumans fighting it all out with poor Sky caught in the middle, and it looks like we're taking it in that particular direction. First of all, the opening scene is actually a flashback to the events that happened almost right away after Season 1 ended, with Coulson meeting up with, I believe it was Billy, and Sam was on the phone, Billy Koenig being reprised by Patton Oswalt. And this opening scene did a couple of things. One, it made me like Patton Oswalt's character even more, and made me wish that he was back on the scene more than just in a flashback. Because one of the things I like about him that it was fully encompassed in this flashback scene was how geeky and nerdy and down-to-earth he is, while at the same time being a competent agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. Like, he gets up, he's got his Star Wars sheets, by the way, nice promotion there, Disney, and he puts on his really nerdy socks, and he's talking to his brother about Call of Duty and everything, but as soon as he needs to get to work, he puts on his lanyard, and he's briefing Coulson once he arrives, so it's like an actual S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, and I'm like, I like this character. I just wish he was more in this show, at least more so in this season. But it's Patton Oswalt, he's got things to do, he's a comedian, he's got stand-up, all this kind of thing, so he can't really be doing too much of it. But I'm really hoping that he's liking the character enough that maybe once his schedule clears up, he'll be in the show a lot more often, especially if there's a Season 3 to be coming around the corner. But the much more interesting thing that this flashback scene provided us with is that Theta Protocol not just consisted of calling in the Avengers after what Coulson said in the last episode, but Theta Protocol also consisted of the construction of this hidden helicarrier. And if you have not seen Avengers Age of Ultron, then I kind of pity you, because if you're watching this show, I'm pretty sure you're a big enough Marvel fan to be able to catch Age of Ultron on opening weekend. But in case you're some of the folks that didn't, after all, it did make less money than the first one did on opening weekend, so it might make a little bit more sense if you are one of those people that are waiting until the second weekend once the crowds have been dissipated, you want to go check out the movie then, and you are still watching this show currently, then I guess, spoilers for Avengers Age of Ultron in case you haven't seen it, but this explains where that helicarrier came from in the climax of Avengers Age of Ultron. It was actually one of my minor nitpicks of that movie, of how S.H.I.E.L.D. was destroyed after the resurgence of Hydra within it, and because of that, it kind of cut off resources. Nick Fury went into hiding, and S.H.I.E.L.D. was being blamed for all these attacks. And like I said, resources were limited, almost non-existent. So for this carrier to come out of nowhere, I was like, okay, this is like an easy fix, very convenient one. And even though I still feel it's a tad bit convenient, the conveniency, the nature of that conveniency, depleted after the reveal that Coulson was actually making this helicarrier under wraps, and it was part of the entire Theta Protocol. And I was like, okay, this is actually rather cool. After that, we basically have Coulson dropping the mic. He literally drops the lanyard like he just dropped the mic. After the events of Avengers Age of Ultron have finally transpired, Coulson just looks at Rodriguez and be like, boom, I helped with that. I brought in the Avengers, I brought in this helicarrier, check it out. And there, again, the show may or may not spoil Age of Ultron for people who have missed the movie and have not been able to check it out just yet, because there's a couple of lines of dialogue that may reveal what happened, reveal part of what happened at the end of Age of Ultron. They're not going to spoil every single little detail, especially not even the big Easter eggs that happened within that movie, but the main plot, the main conflict that was happening at the end of Age of Ultron may get spoiled by one or two lines of dialogue, mainly from Rodriguez. Gonzales. Why do I keep wanting to call him Rodriguez? Maybe it's because his first name is Robert Gonzales. I keep wanting to call him Rodriguez. This is just so weird. But after this, we spend practically the next 2/3 or so of the episode creating this plan in which Coulson proposes to Gonzales that they unify both of their shields. One single shield with Coulson as director and Gonzales as his advising counsel. And as this one shield, he proposes that they go and negotiate terms with the people of Afterlife, because at this point tension is rising on both fronts. Like, both are... It reminds me almost of X-Men First Class, where you had that scene towards the end that takes place during the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the two destroyer ships or whatever, they're trying to figure out who's going to press that button first and launch that missile. At least that's how I remember the movie. I might be wrong, but it's like that's what they're doing. They're trying to figure out who's going to make the first move and deciding whether or not they should go in for a war or try to prevent one. And things get even more tense when Gonzales' team within S.H.I.E.L.D. is obviously very reluctant to do this whole thing, because they feel like the Inhumans are rather dangerous, especially when Gordon and Rayna teleport onto their ship after Rayna has supposedly a vision in which she sees this rock that has Kree writing in it, which is actually the thing that Gonzales had in his cargo hold. For some reason, I thought it was Loki's scepter, and from there it got into Von Strucker's hands, and that's where it gets tied in with Age of Ultron. But apparently, I was wrong, and I was expecting to be wrong, because for some reason that didn't make sense. I don't remember it ever being in Gonzales' custody, but that's what was in his cargo hold. And after Gordon and Rayna managed to teleport there, then they even get more scared of the Inhumans and what they're capable of doing. And then the Inhumans are scared of S.H.I.E.L.D. because now, being that Lincoln was within their care and then get released by Coulson, both Lincoln and Skye, to go back to Afterlife to tell them ahead of time that S.H.I.E.L.D. is coming, he feels like now their secret is exposed, and one of the reasons why they were able to exist is because S.H.I.E.L.D. didn't know that they existed. So now the Inhumans are scared of S.H.I.E.L.D. and are trying to figure out whether or not they should implement the first attack. And I loved it. I loved the tension within it. I loved the drama within it. I loved every bit of it. There's plenty of walking and talking tense scenes that reminded me an awful lot of The West Wing, only the S.H.I.E.L.D. version, and I dug it. After a while, though, the pacing does kind of slow down about 2/3 of the way through before we actually go through with the plan of having the two factions meet up with each other to negotiate terms, especially after Skye and Lincoln do in fact get teleported over there with Gordon to make sure that everything's going to go okay and go according to plan. There is a little bit of a slowdown, but even within that slowdown, there's still some scenes that I like. The main scene that I really appreciated was the one between May and Coulson, bringing up the whole thing that happened in Bahrain, or whatever that place was called. I can't remember the name. But the events that happened in the Melinda episode, in which we figure out what changed May and what made her so stoic. And bringing that back up and having a good character moment between Coulson and May. But the one that I honestly didn't like so much, and it's probably the one thing that I didn't like about the episode in its entirety, is Mac deciding to quit. Now, the reasoning behind Mac quitting made sense, because ever since he came into contact with the Kree technology in Puerto Rico, he's become a bit of alien phobic. And he feels like he just can't work with Coulson, being that he was affected by that as well. And the reasoning behind it made sense, but they never really foreshadowed him quitting. I mean, sure, he never really liked the idea, but just one scene of him thinking to himself or talking to Bobby about this whole thing, saying, I'm not sure if it's gonna be able to work out with me and S.H.I.E.L.D. And then in this scene, all of a sudden he says, "Oh, I'm quitting." I mean, we have that one scene where he's working out and he's like, and Bobby's like, "Hey, I was working on my speech," and he's like, "Nothing's gonna change my mind." So okay, she knew about it, but it was within this episode. I wish that maybe in the last episode he would have mentioned just one thing about quitting, just one thing, and that would have made it feel a little bit better instead of coming somewhat out of left field. Unless this is another plan, another undercover thing, which to be honest at this point will feel like overkill. If he really is quitting, then make it actually happen and make it for a valid reason. But even so, I feel like it just came out of left field, and I gotta be honest, it was a little bit sloppy in the writing. I mean, it's a tiny blemish amongst a really great episode. But then the plan goes underway. Gonzales actually replaces Coulson in going in because they needed somebody objective that doesn't have any kind of emotional ties to this entire thing. And that kind of makes sense. I'm like, okay, as much as I don't like Gonzales going in, kind of makes sense that they go in somebody with a neutral mind. And in terms of emotion. And I liked how the entire thing was being played off, cutting back to S.H.I.E.L.D. being on the outside talking to May, and then cutting back to the inside and the conversation that S.H.I.E.L.D, remembered her name, S.H.I.E.L.D. They mentioned it enough times in this episode that I got it embedded in my brain. But S.H.I.E.L.D. talking to Gonzales, Gonzales presenting this gift, which at first looked like a trick, but it was a legit gift, and he was speaking genuinely about not wanting there to be a war, and he simply just wants to register these people so that when somebody acts up, they can immediately jump on that person and contain them to make sure that they don't do any more harm. And it was a nice, really well developed scene until boom, S.H.I.E.L.D. goes full bad, kills Gonzales with a diviner replica, so to speak, and because Gonzales is not a human, a chosen or whatever, an enhanced, he gets destroyed, much like Trip did back in the mid-season finale. And S.H.I.E.L.D. fakes a gunshot to the shoulder, implicating that maybe S.H.I.E.L.D. attacked her, thus igniting what I was predicting, a war between the Inhumans, S.H.I.E.L.D., and poor S.H.I.E.L.D. being caught in the middle, and that's probably what the finale will entail. And S.H.I.E.L.D. taking this decision, even though it was shocking for it to happen in this scene, it wasn't all that surprising because we saw shades of S.H.I.E.L.D. being bad in previous episodes. I remember that back in that first episode where we barely got introduced to her or reintroduced to her, and she talks to Cal, and she tells her that, oh, Skye has finally arrived in Afterlife, our daughter is back, and Cal wants to see her, and she coldly and casually says, "No, you can't see her right now," without any kind of emotion on her face. That was the first time that made me go, maybe S.H.I.E.L.D. is not 100% who she says she was, especially when she goes up to Rayna, who also has a part in this episode, saying, "Any decisions about your vision will be made by me." I'm like, okay, you're assuming authority here, something's up with you. And in this scene is what we finally see happen with her. She doesn't want anything to happen to Skye, just like what happened with her back in the Hydra days. And that makes sense. It's a very... it's a motivator that makes her more than just a villain saying, "No, I want bad things to happen." No, there's a legit reason why she's so scared of S.H.I.E.L.D. because she just doesn't want to take any more chances, and she doesn't want to take those chances with her daughter. And it makes sense. It's a very pathological reasoning behind a villain, something that villains should do, which is to have that moral mindset that they're right. And that's what always makes a good villain. So what made Ultron a really good villain despite the development issues. And speaking of Rayna, she is in an awful lot in this episode, and she gets caught by Gordon because I like that scene where Cal is describing in detail what Rayna's all about and how she's manipulative, she gets what she wants, and she's always wanting something. I like his comparison about his little story about how she wanted the stale pastries from a pastry shop, but then after a while she started desiring the fresh ones, and she managed to convince the owner to give her the fresh ones. And I like that analogy, and I liked how they caught onto her and her vision started to smell like bullshit. And I like that out of all the people, Gordon was actually the one who was able to smell her bullshit, because after a while he was buying into it. But as soon as she started suggesting that maybe she should meet with S.H.I.E.L.D. and S.H.I.E.L.D. should be taken somewhere, that's what made Gordon go like, wait a minute, off screen at least. And that's what gets her caught. And that's what makes me feel bad for that redhead, because chances are Rayna is going to go full on you know, Sonic the Hedgehog here, just like she did in that cave with those scientists. And just when you thought things couldn't escalate anymore, Ward returns at the ending of this episode in full villain form, which it made me happy. It made me scared for our heroes, but it made me happy that Ward wasn't just going to be this independent contractor that simply just follows orders that he's given no matter which side. And he's willing to do anything to get things done. I was okay with that, but I rather preferred him to be a full-on villain. And I'm glad that he's returning with literally with a vengeance. It was part of his whole plan to leave Carl there, earn their trust, and manage to get one of them. And he manages to take Bobby hostage as well as a Quinjet, and it was just all part of the plan. It was all part of the plan, like the Joker said. I feel like an idiot. But anyways, Ward returns and he plans revenge on Coulson and his team, and I couldn't be any more happier because he's a full-on villain. He's back to being a full-on villain. He's definitely going to be taking part in the season finale, and I'm looking forward to it. So despite my issue with Mac quitting all of a sudden and that minor slowdown that still had some interesting scenes towards the last third of the episode, this was one of those episodes that as soon as I turned it off, I was like, that was good. That was really good. And I had a smile on my face because it had enough tension, it had enough drama and good moments that didn't require action. I mean, we did have a fight between Carl and Bobby, but I remember seeing an article or a review somewhere complaining about there not being that much action in this episode. And in my opinion, that didn't bother me whatsoever. It's better to have natural action scenes rather than to force one into every episode just because you need to have one. And this episode certainly didn't need to have an action scene to keep me invested. And what I did like is that aside from the tie-in with the helicarrier at the beginning, I also liked that Gonzales, before he met his demise in this episode, decided to connect the events of the Inhuman storyline that's happening here in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and making it relevant to what transpired in Age of Ultron by saying that Ultron was created because one man, Tony Stark, made decisions for the whole team. And that's what he didn't want there to happen in his S.H.I.E.L.D. with Coulson. Well, now, being that Gonzales is out of the picture, it looks like we're going to have to turn to Coulson to get us out of this mess in the season finale. So for that, I give Scars much like Age of Ultron, a really high 8 out of 10. Really high. It was borderline 9 if it wasn't for the out of left field decision of Matt quitting. Which, like I said, just one scene in the last episode would have fixed that. But hey, what can you do? So let me know what you guys thought of this week's episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and I'll see you guys next time with my review of the finale for Season 2 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Take care.